And there we go. Hey, we are now live on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, the whole universe. And I'm here on a not too bad Friday morning here in Colorado. It's a little snowy on the ground and stuff like that. I'm glad I'm not in the Northeast. I've got a friend of mine in New Hampshire who sent me a picture this morning of her car in a hotel parking lot. She's getting ready to do an audit, probably about 2 feet of snow on the hood.
So, I was going to say, how did she know it was her car?
Yeah, exactly. You dig it out and it ends up being somebody else's. Yeah. So welcome to Food Safety Chat, everybody. I'm going to type over here, make sure, and say hello. And last week I misspelled hello, which was really embarrassing. So Hello. There we go. So type in and say hello to us. I am Brian Armentrout. I'm the founder of the Food Safety Foundation. Today I have a very special guest with me, Michael Neuwirth of the Neuwirth Consulting Firm. So Michael, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, Brian. Nice to be with you from a sunny and very cold, by relative standards, New York. And happy Friday to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you ready for Christmas?
I am. I'm ready for a break. I've got another 6 full days of scheduled work, but middle end of next week, I'm unplugging for a good week or two. How about yourself?
Good for you. Yeah, my family's here in the Denver area, and we're going to do the whole Zoom thing. So we do a gift exchange. So I got my niece, and so I was lucky on that because she loves all things Japanese. So I got her some cool Japanese presents coming. So we're mailing it to the other households, and then we're going to open the presents on Zoom. Normally, we like to do gag gifts, but you really can't do the gag gifts if you're not in person, right? That's just not any fun. So we're trying that, and it's, given the situation right now, it's kind of the best we can do, I think.
Yeah, well, take what we can get, enjoy it, and just ready to usher out this year, and in comes a new one.
Absolutely. Yep. We'll get through this. That's for sure. So everybody, please, in the comment sections, type in where you're at, say hello, let us know. This Food Safety Chat is really, it's a Q&A type situation. So we have a topic that everybody picks. We're going over the number 2 topic from a poll that we talked about here a couple of weeks ago, crisis management and all these type of things, and how important that is within a company, not just within particular discipline, but for everybody really. So with this, we're going to be talking, and with Michael here, we got some amazing expertise around this. He's led this function of communications and PR at some of the largest food companies in the world. So he's got a ton of experience. This is an amazing opportunity to just absolutely pelt him with questions. So as we're going along here and you put your questions in, we're going to love it and answer those questions for everybody. So with that, Michael, are you ready?
Absolutely. I love talking about it.
I did this 2 times ago and I almost forgot again. We have to do our so everybody grab your favorite beverage. So mine, I've got my coffee.
I do have my green tea. Good.
Awesome. And have a drink. And so people probably think I'm plugging for this company, but I'm not. I just love it so much. So this, Michael, is a USB chargeable mug, and you can set the temperature so you can brew your tea in it, and then it maintains the temperature so it doesn't get cold.
Love that. Love that. My Yeti mug, again, no relationship. This will keep a cup of tea warm almost all day.
Nice.
Love it. Love it. In fact, I have to cool it down and then cap it.
What favorite type of tea? What do you like?
I'm a green tea fan. So I love light green teas. So not the super thick and dark ones, really light but I'll drink it all day. It is my go-to bev.
Nice. Yeah, there's some good. I worked with a lady in R&D at Boulder Brands from China, and so she would just bring me some of the most amazing teas. Really nice, earthy, robust teas to drink in the morning, and then in the afternoon, I like a nice Moroccan mint tea or something like that. So I'm a big tea fan as well. But lately, I've been on the coffee hit. So
very nice.
So we got Michael from Westchester County in New York, so not too far away. Mimi from Alberta, welcome. And guys, as we're going through this, right, again, so questions, more than appreciated. And afterwards, you notice here too, we've got, am I putting correctly? Yeah. So we have our emails on here too. So if you think of a question afterwards, or you don't want to put it in the forum, that's fine too. Send us your questions. We're happy to answer. So with that, let's dive in here. So crisis management. First thing, Michael, I think a lot of people in where I come from, the manufacturing operation world for food, especially on the plant side, they think of crisis management as just simply mock recalls and traceability, but that's not it.
Oh no, that's barely scratching the surface. So perhaps I should just take a step back. So
Yeah.
I've led communications for large food companies and small food companies, startups as well. Most recently with Danone, running the North American communications function for the businesses here. And part of that was inclusive of both spokesperson and crisis communications, but also for one part of the business, the entirety of the crisis management process for our cultured dairy business. So I'm really, when you think about it, it's a discipline. It's an area of expertise, and it requires tremendous organization.
Mhm.
Because the moment you have an unexpected situation, that's not the time to be figuring out what is my protocol and who's my team. And so I would say, if it really, it's a whole body of work.
Mhm.
And it's not a plan you put on a shelf. It's not an idea. There are some basic philosophies regarding crisis management and crisis communications, which are really important. And those you sort of live in your head and your heart. But then there are also protocols. Really important to have protocols. So something you know really well from food safety world. But unlike the food safety world, it's not prescriptive
Mm.
because you never know what that crisis is going to be.
Yeah.
And so there's this philosophy of scenario planning, which is imagining the most likely scenarios, what's going to happen and what would you do. And then you have the guidelines and principles philosophy, which is we don't know exactly what's going to happen because every situation is different. So instead, let's approach it with a guidelines and a procedures mentality instead of trying to anticipate things that we really couldn't imagine. Otherwise, if we could imagine them, they probably wouldn't happen. So so that's philosophy number one. But I just, yeah. So it really is, and it's not a part-time job. A lot of companies do like sort of put it off on the side and say that's a part-time job, and that's a mistake generally. If you're a large company, in my opinion, because there are always ways to improve, and obviously the best crisis is the crisis you avoid.
Mhm.
And so if you've got someone focused on this, you can likely avoid most.
Yeah, most situated. Yeah, you bring up a good point. This is something I've always taught my quality managers. So, like, I've ran quality assurance in large food companies, and in what we do, so quality assurance, food safety, legal, communications, a lot of these groups within companies. Unfortunately, if we do our job well, no one notices because we keep those things from happening in the first place.
Absolutely, and confidentiality is a really important concept in crisis because while you have an incident or crisis, the rest of the business still needs to operate.
Yeah.
So you can't. So it really is one of the philosophies is it's a need to know situation. So if an incident or a crisis involves just one part of the business, don't broadcast it. For a lot of reasons. One is keep everyone focused and heads down on what they need to do. Pull in those people, those resources that you need. But if you're going to do that, make it a full-time, not a full-time, but make it the top priority for them in that moment. Because a crisis really does need to, once you've hit that threshold of it's not an incident, it's a crisis. And that's an important distinction, which we can talk about as well. But an incident, things happen and you generally get over them. A crisis is something that is a true business interruption. It is a threat to your reputation. It involves potentially long-term derailment of your business objectives, and or human health or safety are involved, and or major significant environmental risk is involved, job losses, things like that. That's the threshold at which the word crisis, in fact, should be used, as opposed to an incident, which is something that you can generally course correct and fix without any of those major impacts.
That's a good point. Let's see. So Andrew's got a comment here. So my organization just did a mock recall, and I want to hit on the point around the way we gloss over the PR aspect. Absolutely. How much of the recall program does this need to / should it be? The program, the testing, the PR limits, use of counsel, etc. What do you think, Michael?
Well, public relations is often an afterthought, but the reality is perception is the reality. So what someone thinks about your brand being tarnished, or the quality standards not being there, or a health or environmental risk or people risk to a business's operations, those perceptions ultimately become reality, and that can be a business threat if not checked and taken very seriously. So without a doubt, communications needs to be at the table. There are a couple core functions of every crisis, and communications is always one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, you make a good point, because once in the marketplace that linkage is made between that crisis and your company, it's extremely difficult to break that.
It's like a cathedral building. It takes generations to build them, but one act of God to destroy them.
Yeah, look what happened to Notre Dame, right? One quick fire and
exactly. And so, and that's the same with a reputation, because your last memory is your lasting memory, right? So how do you shape that? And there, depending on what your brand or your company is, there are core attributes that you want to always embody in your communications. But most important thing is, don't create a vacuum of information, no voids, because in the absence of information, we make up stuff, right? That's what we all do. And we generally make up and surmise the worst. We think the worst. It's how we're wired. And we overcome that sometimes by perceived optimism, but that's just the way we're wired. So keeping in mind that perception is reality, and communications as a guiding principle needs to be at the table in every crisis and incident, right there with legal. They are two sides of the same coin, and that coin is about survival and reputation. So ensuring good reputation at the end of an incident or a crisis is just as important as coming out of the right side of the legal situation.
Right. And I think you've made some really good points there. So one of them is that when a crisis is going on, it's the company takes on a persona, right? The consumer is looking for information and they're wanting the company to convey that. So it almost becomes a one-on-one conversation. And so that's where that communications piece becomes so important. They want that information and they want to feel that it's coming from someone, right? Not this big anonymous company. So it's like, yep, here at our company, we're having an issue. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's what you need to know. If you'd like to ask us more questions, please give us a call here, and building that rapport between those two. And that skill set, I think, really is where communication shines.
Absolutely. And it's humanizing situations. Yeah. So if you really got a crisis, at the end of the day, people are going to be impacted, whether it's as simple as I can't get my favorite flavor of, Wonka bar, or it could be I'm going to lose a job, or a health or safety risk. If it was a people-related accident in a plant, could be, or a food safety risk, which are real. So putting a human face and a human tone on those communications goes a long way.
That's a very good point. Now I'm thinking kind of about, with COVID and everything we're going through right now. So as I'm watching TV and we see all these commercials now, it's like we're in this together and people holding hands and all these type of things. And I'm finding myself becoming kind of jaded. It almost seems like a Me Too thing, right? So these companies are saying, oh, our other companies are making these commercials with this message. We need to do it too. And it comes across as disingenuous in some cases.
Yeah, I think everyone jumped into the pool on that. I think companies, though, do feel like they have they need to say something, and so doing their part in a way that shows a meaningful program, though. So if you're Airbnb providing lodging for frontline healthcare workers, that's a meaningful application of the business. And hotels have done the same, Marriott as well, and others. So using your business resources and then talking about how you're bringing your capacity to bear on a crisis, or in this case, a pandemic.
Right.
So I think that's where it becomes important, is to make sure that there's connection and linkage between what you're saying and what's actually happening, as opposed to just saying, we're in this together. Okay, yeah, we're in this together.
Yeah.
Or it's called a pandemic.
We get it. Exactly. Now got a comment here from Raphael. Good seeing you, my friend. Glad you were able to join us. According to the trainings I had in the food industry, it is important to write down who's in charge of what type of communication. It seems a bit of a contradiction about limiting communication and absence of information that you talk about both. The other point is the legal obligation to inform food inspections about the risk to the brand, product, et cetera, is managed even if there's an incident. Good point. So
there's a lot to unpack in that, though. Raphael makes a really good couple points in here. So first, structure. Who is in charge? So at the end of the day, there needs to be somebody who is a dedicated leader of the crisis. And that, by and large, is not going to be the CEO, because the CEO needs to make his or her their own decisions based on what the collective crisis committee determines. So there needs to be a little bit of governance and separation in that. Second is, who is in charge? Well, it can depend on the nature of a crisis. You could have, in my case, I'm a comms background, communications background, but in more of a food safety crisis, we might want someone else who's trained in crisis management with a food safety background running that. So it's good to have options, but most importantly, whoever is going to be determined to lead a crisis, the structure and the team organization needs to be defined in advance. And that's as simple as like pulling together lists in advance during the quiet times, the good times, of who, where, when are they pulled in. So not necessarily for what are they pulled in, but just basic contact information. And backups always have a deputy, especially on Friday afternoons and holidays, right? I'm sure we'll get to the unfortunate timing of crises later. But
and there was something that you said, and I know I went, when you were talking, because it was exactly what I say. So when I was at a company and I would sit down with the CEO and say, listen, whoever it was, if a recall situation happens and we have a class 1 recall where food illness is involved and people's lives are potentially at stake, you need to realize that you're not in charge. Yeah. And I would kind of sit and wait for their reaction, and you kind of get, the CEO reaction. And they're like, listen, here's what I'm saying is you need to step back, right? You need to let the team management, I will function as the recall coordinator, but I'm not going to be the spokesman, right? And so one of the huge lessons I learned from past recalls that I've managed is it's like the president, right? The president, well, it's kind of a little bit different route, but normally the president doesn't go out and talk to the press. He sends out his press secretary, who has the talking points and the information that they need to communicate, and they'll answer questions and then go back. So we learned that through, hard fought lessons in the field, that, okay, the recall coordinator is responsible for acting within the company to manage processes. They need the time to gather data and think and get together with the team. And then you have a spokesman who's communicating that information outwardly within the organization and to the media and whoever else needs to know. And the CEO needs to do what he needs to do in those areas. And a lot of times that was, figuring out strategic, how do we want to manage this long term and these type of things. And I would also say to them, Michael, is what you need to understand is we're not going to win this, right? The goal here is to come out of this in as best shape as we can. We've reached a situation where something happened that shouldn't have happened, but now we need to recover and do the best we can. And then afterwards, we need to circle back and really do a postmortem and figure out why it happened and what we can do to keep it from happening again.
Yeah. And I mean, so many great points that you've mentioned, Brian. And that's hard for some CEOs because they're hardwired to be leaders.
Yeah.
And so but give them a job. Right? The role of the crisis leader is to give everyone who's needed a job. And that includes the CEO, who may be a spokesperson. If you have a loss of life or something like that, you probably want to put forth your lead person in charge in that. But I completely agree. Let the experts do their thing. Just because you want to jump in and help stop the fire in a burning building doesn't mean you should cut off the fire engine on the way to the fire, right? So
Nice.
let them go and do their thing.
All right, we're getting some amazing questions here. Let's see. So we had Raphael's question, and now we got, I believe, Michael's up next year. How often do you find that the C-suite is not involved in the drafting of a recall plan slash crisis response plan, and rather is it left to QA slash QC departments? How does this impact the communication strategy when a crisis arises? Well, I've got a very definite answer to that, but I'll let you go first.
Well, I'll take the first swing at it, which is QA needs to be represented in the C-suite. So if what we're making, especially in food, if you don't start with quality, you're not going to have a long-term business. That is definition sustainability 101. So quality needs to be represented in the C-suite in the food industry. I won't say that it's the same for every industry, but certainly in food. Hospitality, maybe not so key, but food safety is job one. I hope everyone's violently nodding in agreement with me on that. And so the premise is a little, I'm not sure I'm aligned with the premise, but if in that rare situation where it's not represented at the C-suite, then yes, absolutely. The crisis plan needs endorsement from the C-suite and sometimes the board as well. But I would also say that the C-suite needs to be briefed on what the crisis plan is once a year. And that doesn't mean do a whole mock or a trial scenario. You can do that, and training is always better. More training is better. But they need to acknowledge receipt and training on it, because when the proverbial, what hits the fan, we've got to make sure that everyone at least has access to it and is aware that there is a protocol in place. Because the worst thing, in my opinion, is cowboy response plans. Someone acting in their own best intentions, trying to make everything okay. And crises aren't solved by individuals. Crises are solved by teams. So it is the penultimate definition of teamwork in a business setting.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you made some really super important points. So absolutely, QA needs to be involved at the high level. And what also needs to happen is on that training piece is a lot of times if QA is involved with, okay, here's the crisis plan, here's how I'm looking at this, they're looking at it just through their view of recall. And they're thinking about some of the players involved, so legal and operations and procurement and what have you, they're not thinking big enough. And what I've found is that you need to train, especially like people like the sales team and these guys, because to your point earlier, Michael, which was super important, is people will act in the absence of evidence. And what I found was if you don't tell the sales guys what's going on, because the customers are calling them, that's their contact, right? So the retailer is calling their sales guy and saying, hey, there's this recall thing going on, what's going on? And the sales guys were like, yeah, right. Well, and they're going to start making stuff up and saying, yeah, here's what I think's going on. And then all of a sudden those back channel communications are going on and the team doesn't even know about that. And you get the retailer on the phone and you say, here's what's going on. And they're like, well, that's not what I heard. And now you have miscommunication with your customer.
Yeah, and you haven't even factored in the negative selling that happens when brand A in the marketplace, let's say it's the market leader, has a problem, and brand B is coming. They are gunning for you. Yeah. So it's a dog eat dog world out there. Sorry, guys, but So information, arming the team broadly writ large with talking points. Mm-hmm. And in fact, drafting, we write customer letters because I want to make sure that it comes from the right people with the right points.
Yep. And don't forget to train the plants. Because the media is going to go to the plant.
Absolutely.
I remember seeing on TV a news story. There was a recall going on, and there was a news van kept outside of a company, and they were interviewing employees as they walked out the employee entrance. I remember there was this lady, and they grabbed her, and she started talking. And she's like, "Oh yeah, there's a problem going on. There's all kinds of people in the plant. We don't know what's going on. We told them there was stuff going on, but they didn't listen to us." And I'm just going, oh my God, right? And that was all over the news.
Yeah. And so training your people, centralizing communications, always have a central comms point. If you do have a plant-specific issue, then I always make it a practice of training the plant directors, not only on the procedures for crisis, but media training. And that it doesn't have to be a full day type of thing. You know, even if I can get a plant director on the phone for an hour or half an hour, I can do an adequate media training for them.
Yeah, I actually brought in a media expert in one of my past companies, and we did media training, and he would play the role of the reporter. And so he would show them the tricks that they would use to get them to talk and get them mad and get them angry. And then he would explain how they would edit that. And then we would go back and he would tell them how to properly respond, and they would redo the interview. And it was an amazing experience.
It's a great process, and it helps not just in the thick, in that type of bristly moment, but those skills can help you in many different settings. So it's really worth doing.
So hopefully, Michael, we've answered your question. If not, please comment more, and we'll circle back around. So great questions, guys. Keep them coming. Andrew, this is the customer's point of view, the talk so far. Have you seen how an organization in crisis communicate ultimately to the point of resurrection from the ashes is through? I'm thinking of the way that my friends at a company in Colorado came back from their recall. He's talking about E. coli and death, right? Serious stuff. They are now an A1 organization with over-the-top systems. Sincerely, they're a model operation, yet nearly 10 years later, they're still stigmatized, right? So yeah, a couple of points that we made earlier, right? Once in the marketplace, right, you've got that linkage of your company to an issue.
Yeah.
Man, all right. How long ago did Jack in the Box and E. coli happen?
Perfect example. Great example.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're an amazing company now, and they have top-notch systems. Unfortunately, one of the things, Andrew, and this is what I'll use in my training, is really there's two companies. And when I talk with companies and in my consulting business, I'll look for this, is there's 2 points of view. There's what I verbalize as, well, we've never had a problem before, right? And so what they're really saying is we're relying on past luck. Well, evidently, we must be doing some stuff right, and that means in the future, nothing will ever go wrong. Man, that's dangerous, right? And then there's the companies that quote unquote have seen the light, right? They've had something happen. The company has felt significant pain, and hopefully, I mean, you hope it never comes to the point, Andrew, of what you're pointing out in here, right? Where people die. And then all of a sudden a company wakes up and they're like, oh my God, what are we doing? We need to put things in place. And then all of a sudden it becomes really easy for those companies. I call those then the true believers, right? They understand the importance of crisis management and communication and media training and everything that we talk about. And it's unfortunate that some companies have to go through that. And Michael, maybe you got a better answer than I do, but I don't know how to get them to that point sometimes.
Well, I think you got to stick to your game. And an example that I like to draw on is, I think Chipotle is a pretty decent one. Yeah. Chipotle has continually emphasized the quality of its ingredients and its freshness. And even during its most dark moments in the several years ago, they stuck with that. Yeah. And keep hitting that message home on quality and freshness, And over time, I believe any company can work back to earn its reputation. But it does take time. As I said, it takes generations to build a cathedral, and it can take one fire to bring it down.
Yeah, and Chipotle is a good example because I personally know a lot of the quality people in that program over there, and they've brought in top-notch, world-class people. So good for them.
But my point is, though, on the messaging side of the equation, stick with what is true to your business, and because first of all, it's the most effective way to do it. Because you're not spending you're not double downing on marketing dollars. One, a quality message and safety, and the other, okay, for what do we want to stand from a brand perspective and a crisis recovery. But if you can find a way to bundle those together, that's ideal.
Yep, totally agree. Let's see, Pedro has a question, and Pedro's with us from Mexico City, so welcome. Most of the mock recalls I've audited just stop at traceability. Need to consider the worst scenario. And really, Pedro, you're hitting on the main point. That's why I wanted to have this talk today, is mock recall. And if you're looking at SQF and the GFSI standards and things like that, just doing a traceability exercise, it's 5% of what you need to be doing with this. Right? If you're just doing that, you're going to fail.
Yeah, and I think equally important, you've got to look at what are the core issues and how to in mock situation scenario planning. We always do escalations. Mm-hmm. So once you so it's not just problem one. It's what are the symptoms that could lead to problem one, and then you escalate in the scenario in a training situation. Again, this is not live fire; it's a training situation. So in that situation, then how do you escalate so that unexpected curveball comes in, and then a fastball, and then a slider, and so you're really thinking about not just one piece of the potential problem, but the whole ball of wax of the business. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, though, that whole ball of wax that's where the issue is going to arise, I think, not just one item related to traceability, which is literally a pin it's one thread in a quilt.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Let's see here. So that was a very good point. So let's see here. So that was Pedro. So Rafael had an additional point here. Yes, this is the point. Crisis management, a process of structure defined both in advance in part of BRC and SQF. Absolutely. Yeah. Jeannie wanted to know, will this recording be posted? Yes. So with my Food Safety Foundation, I'm also, Michael will have a copy as well too. So if you go to my website, it's in my membership group there that you can take a look at and join with that. So thanks for the comments on that. Excellent presentation. We're enjoying it. Andrew as well, yeah. So he's been looking at this as well too. Michael, perhaps outside of your area of expertise, but do you believe food companies under quantify or never quantify the financial exposures related to a food safety incident and therefore never consider proper risk transfer, i.e. contamination, recall insurance? Absolutely. The average cost of a recall, the average, and this is just at product, right? This isn't counting loss in brand reputation or anything like that, $30 million now.
Yep, make sure those insurance premiums are up to date, honestly, and document everything. When you're in a crisis, documentation is critical. Documentation with legal team review, okay? Yeah. Really important. And the financial risks can be substantial, but they don't always need to be borne. They need to be borne by the root cause of the problems, right? And sometimes that is in fact the company itself. Can be a supplier, or can be an equipment maker, can be a transportation company, could be and it can be a multitude of responsible parties. So documentation is really important, not only for identifying what happened to learn from so that we make sure it never happens again. That's really important, but also from a legal and a reporting perspective.
Right. And it also brings up a good point in that, so sometimes functions like quality assurance and communication and legal and things like that, these organizations within a company that are supporting the manufacturing and production of product are viewed as costs, right? It's like, oh, that quality group, they're just costing us money. Or do we really need a communications group and things like that, right? Things like this show you the benefit and what they actually are saving and allowing you to grow. Because if you don't do this properly, your company may not be around tomorrow. It's like car insurance, right? We all have car insurance. Are we expecting a wreck? No. But if it happens, boy, are we glad it's there, because they're going to soften that blow and help your company survive. And they actually, if you set these things up properly, and you have a good communications team and is able to promote the organization and really get that, what we've been talking about, that linkage with the consumers, that actually helps improve sales.
Absolutely. The more trustworthy your brand is, then in that moment of truth at the shelf, the more likely your food is going to be chosen over competitors.
Exactly. I'm really curious on this, Michael. This is something I learned from my experience. Is when a crisis starts to hit, the kind of the general sentiment in the company is everybody wants to immediately act, right? They want to jump at that issue and immediately take it on. And what I found is what you need to do. And so from my experience, right, crisis management and food safety recalls and things like this, is I get a report from the field. We've had a consumer who says they're ill and it's tied to this plant, and immediately we want to activate the crisis management team. And what I've learned and what I build into my processes is you need to take a deep breath and sit back and gather the team and say, step one is to analyze. Do we really have what we think we have? Does the data show it? Do we have additional evidence? Are there other things we need to be considering? Because once you cross that Rubicon and you decide that, yes, we have a crisis situation, there's no going back. So you need to be really, really sure that what you have is real and true. So don't jump too quick.
Well, I liken it to that ancient image of, someone leaning down on a railroad tie, listening for the train coming. Because the better we're able to listen to the network, and the network meaning, or the ecosystem of a business, meaning the consumer care team, suppliers, customers, retailers, our own sales team, line operators, the better we are able at listening for those signs of a coming train, the earlier we're going to be able to do that investigation. So that we can again, the best crisis is the crisis avoided or averted. There will always be incidents. It's just the nature of doing. When you do something, there will always be an unanticipated outcome. Right. But knowing as early as possible is most important. And that, I guess, the only other point I'd add to what you so eloquently said, Brian, is that you got to have a culture of trust. Without a culture of trust, there will be this, especially, and I've seen this many times in manufacturing locations. Manufacturing location, plant director or quality in a plant says, "Oh, we got this covered. I don't want corporate coming. They're going to breathe down my necks. They're going to kill us with procedures and costs so they try to keep it to themselves, fully confident that they will be able to manage it. And sometimes that's true, but when it's not, it's a real problem. And that's fundamentally, it's a lack of trust between people on the same team. Mm-hmm. Might be different departments. I'm manufacturing QA, you're corporate Q, but at the same end of the day, we're going to all have the same problem. It's just whether the problem's in my left pocket or is it in my right pocket. There's still, if I get problems in my pants, it doesn't matter. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and to your point, Aaron, if there's that lack of trust and they're like, no, we got it, and it gets to that point where they don't got it, it's too late.
Well, yeah. Once that train is barreling down on you, game over.
You're going to get squashed.
You're pancaked.
Now, for bigger food companies, right? You're at Danone. I worked at White Wave, Dean Foods, different companies, and they have internal communications resources and things like that. But what if you're a smaller company? You're a medium-sized or a smaller company. What can they do for these type of things?
Oh, well, that's the shameless plug I was not expecting. Yeah. First of all, get some, but get some during the good times. When you're at the size of exposure, and think about it from an exposure perspective. When am I big enough to have a big problem? Because the minute you're big enough to have a big problem, you need thoughtful preparation. It's okay to stumble a little bit, but once you start getting into significant risk, then you need to think about what resources do I have at the table. And there are lots of great resources that you can rent in the case of consulting, individuals or PR agencies. There are even food specialist agencies for our industry, and help them, or I say engage them to develop protocols. Not scenario planning for every possible thing that could go wrong, because you'll never get it right. You just won't. But but what are the procedures that we need to have in place, and who needs to be part of the team? Think that through, and codify it, institutionalize it in your fledgling business. By the time you get to be a mid-sized food company, boy, you better have a food safety and a developed communications program. And by mid-size, I'm talking about more than between 50 and 100 million in annual sales. You need to have this in place.
Absolutely.
And sooner is better, obviously.
Yeah, back to the example of, if you're a $50 million company and you have a $30 million recall, you're done.
Exactly.
You're done. And yeah, it's kind of the way I envision it, Michael, is that, if you're a small entrepreneurship and you're wearing all the hats, right? And all of a sudden you start hiring people and you start, moving those hats out and saying, all right, you're the salesperson, these type of things. That's the point in time where you've got to build these cultures and say, okay, here's what we want to be. Because if you don't do those things, you're never going to make it to the next level.
That's true. And your customers are going to expect it. Once you get to that scale, and again, the smaller you are, the better, or the earlier you do it in your life stage, the greater chance you're going to survive. But your customers are going to ask for it. Whole Foods is going to ask for it. You want to be, particularly in the organic and natural space, if that's where your business is, they will ask for, what is your crisis plan? Because your crisis plan is their crisis plan.
Exactly. They're the ones who have to deal with the aftermath, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's see if there's any other questions, guys. Plug them in here. We're just about out of time. So, Michael, any closing thoughts around crisis management for everybody?
Plan. One thing we didn't touch on is the post-mortem very much.
Yeah.
And if I have an incident or a crisis, generally when you get through that, you're so relieved. You're just, like, oh, 2020 is over. But in the case of a crisis, once you're done with it, that's the moment to really pause and regroup, to think about what happened. And big companies and small alike, we're really not as good as we need to be on this in terms of thinking through what are the learnings and how do we improve? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? How do I get my life back sooner from a crisis? And the best way to do that is learn and train. So the post-mortem is critical. No, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and it's been a lot of fun, Brian.
Yeah, isn't this fun? I love doing this. This is a lot. It's so much better than a webinar where you're not involved and you're not interactive. And these questions, guys, thank you very much. Amazing, really astute questions. So thank you, everybody, on a Friday for giving us this information and allowing us to meet with you and kind of chat a little about this really important issue. So, Michael, hope you enjoy your weekend and Christmas, and 2021 got to be better than 2020, right? So
looking forward to it.
We're on our way. So thanks again, Michael. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.